Well, thank you very much. It's the first time I've ever been introduced as a turkey, and I shall take this memory away with me if it's one thing I remember from this conference. Ladies and gentlemen, our country stands on the brink of an exciting and hugely promising chapter in our nation's history. Landmark is often an overused word, but the decision made in the referendum last year that we should leave the European Union can be described in that way. A very significant fork in the road as we choose our path. We may not have chosen the way that is simplest to navigate or easiest to walk, but we choose the one that leads us in the right direction. And as we all come together to deliver on the democratic will expressed in that referendum, by leaving the EU, we will shake off the blinkers that have kept us focused on the concerns and demands of one small corner of the earth and lift our sights beyond Europe to the rest of the globe. Quite literally, a whole new world of opportunity is waiting for us. Now let me acknowledge something straight away. Although we have passed that landmark, although we've taken that fork in the road, we still cannot be sure just where that journey will take us, because this will be partly decided in a series of negotiations. If we were negotiating with ourselves, I could tell you now what the outcome would be, but sadly we're not. So that's not allowed. Neither can a Prime Minister. So perhaps people should stop asking her so often all along the way. Because what she has done is set out our priorities for a new positive relationship with the EU. In January this year, she listed 12 broad aims. Let's just quickly go through those. Number one, certainty over the deal and a vote in both houses of Parliament before it happens. Two, control of our laws. United Kingdom courts, United Kingdom Parliament, not the European Court of Justice or European courts having precedence over it. Thirdly, a stronger United Kingdom with powers returned to devolved administrations. And hopefully, as someone who's a localist, actually, we don't only devolve powers back to Westminster and back to our four nations, but actually even lower, closer to communities, closer to the people. Maintaining the common travel area with Ireland. Controlled immigration, and Sundar talked very eloquently about the fact that we can have a fairer immigration policy post-Brexit, attracting the brightest and hopefully the best from across the world. Rights for EU nationals already in our country, but also, and the bit that the House of Lords seems to be forgetting, British citizens in other EU countries. Theresa May has already made that commitment quite clear, that the moment that the rights of British citizens are guaranteed in other EU countries, we are then in a position to guarantee the rights of EU citizens in our country. And what I find shameful are countries such as France and Germany, and maybe one or two others, who are using UK nationals in their country as bargaining chips before Brexit and causing uncertainty amongst EU nationals in our country. Theresa May has been quite clear, and we need to resolve this as soon as possible. Protection of workers' rights. Free trade through an ambitious agreement with the EU, but without us contributing the large sums to the EU budget. But not only the EU, because we're lifting our eyes beyond the EU, new trade agreements with countries around the world, outside the EU customs union. Cooperation on science and innovation. The same in the fight against terrorism and crime internationally. And finally, an orderly Brexit with an agreement within 2 years, followed by a phased implementation. Of course, that's quite clear. But after her speech, our opponents still tried to say that she had no plan, or that she was refusing to reveal what she was looking for. To me, that looked and sounded like a plan, and Theresa May looked and sounded like a person in a position to deliver it. So what should our guiding principles be? The points on our negotiating compass, so to speak, as we start to navigate these talks once Article 50 is invoked. Well, let me lay out eight, based on my own 8 principles, if you like, for negotiation, based on my own experience of negotiations in Brussels in my time as an MEP since 2005, and in my experience as a leader of a group in the European Parliament. And anyone here who has negotiated in business or negotiated politically or elsewhere will be aware of some of these principles that we should not forget. At times, I think we have felt that our politicians who have been negotiating on our behalf have forgotten some very basic principles. Firstly, you go into a negotiation being quite clear about our principles. The EU 27 will be negotiating with us. They deserve that, but so does the public at home. But we must do so without revealing our cards, without showing the other side what we're asking for in every detail before we even go into that room. And I believe that the Prime Minister did that masterfully when she laid out these 12 principles in that speech in January. Secondly, let's make sure we set the right tone, because in Brussels, the mood music matters. We should seek to enter these negotiations in a spirit of cooperation, making it clear that we do not see leaving the EU as a zero-sum game, we gain, you lose, or the other way around. In fact, or nor do we see or wish to see the breakup of the EU. We wish to see a prosperous UK next to a prosperous EU as good neighbours, cooperating not only in trade but in other areas of mutual interest. But at the same time, we should also be prepared for the fact that not everyone will act in a rational way, and that there will be some people calling for the UK to be punished because we dared to leave, because they also want to use it as a disincentive to political parties, particularly with elections coming up in France and Germany and elsewhere, to show that actually any country that leaves will not get an easy deal. We have to be aware of that. But that's already happened. But in particular, in Brussels and other member state capitals, we sense that some of the anger and hot-headedness that followed our decision to leave and our delay in triggering Article 50 is now given way to a far more sensible and pragmatic approach. Another principle is that we have to understand how the other side negotiates. In trade negotiations, the EU often divides up its interests or its goals into offensive interests, what it wants from the other party, and defensive interests, what it wishes to defend against. And whilst what we face is not purely a trade negotiation, it would be wise to look at negotiations in this light. Of course, we will be facing an EU seeking to close some markets or sectors that are currently open to British companies because we are leaving. But of course, there are also many parts of the existing relationship that we are seeking to leave because the British people voted to leave the European Union. So we should identify those, but also look at those areas of mutual interest, where in an ideal world, we would continue to cooperate, such as on areas of fighting terrorism, intelligence, and some security operations. We should also identify potential trade-offs. And even if we agree areas of mutual interest, they may be reviewed in a light of other demands. For example, while German car makers or French farmers may want open markets to continue to sell their products to the UK, some French and German finance firms may want to erect barriers to the UK financial and other professional services. We should be aware of these potential pinch points and watching for them as negotiations progress, because we will have to do some trade-offs. We should also remember that the EU is more than the sum of its parts. It is not a monolithic organisation. For a start, there are 3 EU institutions involved: the European Council, or the EU27, the nation states, the European Commission, and the European Parliament. They will not always agree. The Council, in turn, represents 27 members. They will not always agree. The Parliament comprises 751 members from 28 countries in 8 political groups, from communists to the National Front, or as I like to say, from Soviet-style socialists to National Socialists. And what's quite clear, as a pattern starting to emerge, they will not always agree. So while many in Brussels were impatient for Article 50 to be invoked, the EU itself was not really ready for the negotiations until probably the end of last year, when the 3 EU institutions, the Council, the Parliament, and the Commission, finally agreed their respective roles amongst themselves. Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty stipulates that negotiations with any country leaving will be concluded on behalf of the Union by the Council, acting by a qualified majority after obtaining the consent of the European Parliament. However, the European Council has asked the European Commission to do the bulk of the heavy lifting in negotiations, because they have the people, they have the manpower, they have the skills. And that job has been given to Michel Barnier, the former Commissioner for Internal Market covering financial services. Now, while the European Council has been trying to sideline the European Parliament and saying, actually, that's us who's in charge of negotiations, the Prime Minister and British ministers have met with senior MEPs. And this has clearly been appreciated. In one case, one politician said to me, it seems that the British Prime Minister understands the European Parliament better than Donald Tusk, the President of the Council. In December, after the formal EU Council of 28 leaders, the 27 other heads of government had a separate meeting to prepare for Brexit negotiations. Now, those who were trying to criticise Theresa May said this shows that we were being sidelined. Not at all. Actually, what it showed was for the first time, the 27 other countries were getting together to discuss their negotiating tactic. It was reassuring. It actually finally gave us the message and gave everyone the message that they understood that we were leaving and that they had to come together as the EU 27 to start negotiations. Now, that also gives us opportunities as well as some threats for the UK governments. So while some governments, such as the French, have been hostile in public, I have met prime ministers, other ministers, ambassadors, and MEPs from other countries, while initially expressing regret at the fact that we are going to be leaving for all sorts of different reasons. Some, they're worried about an EU without the United Kingdom. Others are worried about dominance of one or two other countries. Some actually believe in the project and see the fact that we are leaving as a psychological blow to building that United States of Europe. But whatever their reason, they've often started a conversation something like this. We're very sad you're leaving, but don't forget our country has a very strong relationship with the United Kingdom, and we have to continue that. And so this offers us an opportunity that on building those strong bilateral relationships. Individual prime ministers I often meet say the same thing to me. They don't say it's really important the EU and the UK have a relationship. Maybe that's a given, but they say it's really important that my country, whichever country they represent, has a strong relationship with the United Kingdom. I think point 6 is we should be prepared to ask for more than what we want. In an article called Learn Lessons from the Failed Negotiations, some of you may have read this article by Max Pearson, a former advisor to David Cameron. And he wrote about a European diplomat who asked him this question. He said, in Europe, we ask for 10 things in order to get 6. But you seem to have asked for 4 things in order to get 4. Why? It's a good question. In any negotiations, you should always ask for more and ask for nice to have things, but things that are not going to be deal breakers. The EU will do exactly the same. Think about Michel Barnier's supposed demand for 60 billion euros for the UK to leave the EU. That is clearly positioning. I mean, some have described it as a sort of, just before the England-New Zealand match, like the haka on the pre-positioning, and sort of staring each other down. But actually, what it is, it's simply asking for more than you're going to get. He's not seriously expecting to get 60 billion euros, but why not ask for it? Why not throw? Why not, why not stir the pot? We should be prepared to construct similar demands, and we shouldn't be afraid of doing so. Another principle of negotiations is that we should be prepared to walk away. We should enter these negotiations with the intention to succeed, but don't be afraid to walk away if we don't get a deal that we're happy with. At some stage, the UK government may have to make it clear that we will simply not accept any deal at whatever price, and we're prepared to walk away and settle for a WTO relationship with the EU and elsewhere, even though we would prefer a tailored EU-UK deal. Anyone who's negotiated will have come across this principle, whether you've negotiated in boardrooms or whether actually you've negotiated in an Egyptian market, for example. In fact, I never forget the time I first negotiated in an Egyptian market, and I started off trying to buy a rug, and it was 200 Egyptian pounds. And I negotiated, I walked away, and I got it down to 32 Egyptian pounds, and I was very proud of myself. I thought, what a great negotiator I am. And as we sat having a cigarette afterwards and I was chatting to the vendor, and I said, that was pretty good what I did, wasn't it? I got down to 32. How much would you have sold it to a local for? He said 25. So, so there we are, we all learn lessons here. And finally, I think we should keep a cool head and a steady hand. Fortunately, Theresa May has both. She has a reputation in Brussels as a tough and shrewd negotiator. Her time as Home Secretary is recalled when she took the UK out of the Justice and Home Affairs chapter of the Lisbon Treaty, then opted back into individual measures that she felt was in our interest to cooperate. She plays her cards very close to her chest. My colleagues in Brussels and elsewhere tell me that they cannot read her. That's exactly what we want from our negotiator. And while Labour and the Lib Dems, and some Conservatives sadly, who wish to block Brexit will criticise every move by the British Prime Minister, my hope is that those who voted for Brexit put aside their impatience and not cramp her style. We have to be patient. Give her time to manoeuvre, space to breathe, and time to tune our demands. For every detail given in public of our position is a hostage to fortune, an advantage handed to the other side, a stick to beat our negotiators and our Prime Minister with. The old proverb, the Elvis Presley song, fools rush in. Greater wisdom there than a whole bank of opposition benches could muster. Look at the egg on the face of many of those who treated the resignation of Ivan Rogers as a disaster. only to see a clearly composed Prime Minister, very much in control, appoint a successor, a much better successor, within 24 hours. The Prime Minister may be doing things the hard way, but she's doing them the best way. She knows that her principled no-running commentary response means a long, rocky road, but she's battling away along it. She realises that she's frustrating EU governments, EU officials, the opposition, Brexiteers, and the media for good measure. But that's too bad, because she's determined to ignore those siren voices to do what is best for the United Kingdom. She will not be fazed by criticism, and she won't be distracted by flattery either. She will do what is simply right. I think, as I said at the beginning, that Brexit is a wonderful opportunity to engage with the rest of the world and revive our relationships with some of our oldest friends and allies once more in a way that membership of the EU has prevented. Let me for a minute just turn to one part. And that nowhere is that probably more true than when we consider the United States. The biggest economy in the world, the greatest power, the most prosperous, our closest allies and greatest friends. Now, admittedly, like all friends, they may sometimes do or say things we don't like. They may even elect people that not all of us in this room would necessarily vote for. But our partnership is one with the American people, not their politicians. And don't forget, when I used to lecture international trade to my students, I used to begin with a lecture that said, trade is not between countries, it is between people and businesses in one country and people and businesses in another country for mutual benefit, between a willing seller and a willing buyer. So if you happen not to like Donald Trump very much, I'd encourage you, as an American might say, don't get too hung up on that. Or as we might say in London, don't let him get up your nose. A US president is only there for a few years. By contrast, the opportunities that Brexit will bring will be there for our lifetimes and our future generations. And this is why Theresa May was absolutely right to reach out to the new administration in its early days. That's why she was right to sell the mutual benefits of a UK-US trade partnership as soon as possible. And that's why she was right to step out from the back of the queue, or back of the line, as Obama claimed, and calmly take her place at the front of the queue. And she didn't just stake out her ground on the issue of trade. In the field of security defence, she won reassurance over the importance of the role of NATO, where there was some doubt, and in protecting the freedom of all of us in the West. And on security and intelligence too, the scope for enhanced cooperation with the United States will be considerable once we are free from the EU. The United States, despite what you may think, remains the land of opportunity, and outside the EU, we can share that opportunity too. But America is not the only part of the world where new horizons will open up to us. The whole world is out there to engage with us, to cooperate with us, and to trade with us. You may have heard Liam Fox talk about how many countries are queuing up to speak to him. As International Trade Secretary, I've already spoken to governments and others in many countries outside the EU who said they cannot wait to get started on talks for a new free trade agreement with us. And that's why it's so wrong to equate Brexit with insularism or intolerance. Because actually my vision of our future Britain is of an open, tolerant, global trade nation. A country with genuine and fair control over its immigration rules, as Sundar said earlier, but one which is more than ever is open to the best talent of the world. A Britain renowned across the world as a hub for innovation and entrepreneurship, a country where science and technology is valued, international cooperation is the bedrock of research, and technology drives our prosperity. My vision is of a country that is fair, free, and open for business with the rest of the world. My hope is that when, in years to come, we look back to the decision of the British people in June 2016, we will see it as a truly historic point when the United Kingdom emerged as not just another European country, but as a truly outward-looking, a tolerant global nation, and a beacon of free trade and liberty for the rest of the world. Thank you very much.